Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that creates content to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and joining me on this wild and weird and maybe deep journey discussing Alec Garland's Men is fellow staff writer Mr. Joshua Howe. He's our Marvel correspondent and also the author of too many books to count at this point, and also one of the co-hosts of the Nerf Herders podcast. What's going on, my friend?
What's up, buddy? Thanks for having me. I like you, I'm a big Alex Garland fan, and so I was excited about this film and excited to talk to you about it. So thanks for having me on.
This movie, I didn't watch any trailers for it. At this point, I'm just kind of like, if A24 puts out a horror movie, I'll watch it. Or if he has like a lot of buzz, I'll do it. Like Lamb was that way for me last year. And sometimes they're kooky and great, and then other times they're just kind of weird and disturbing. It's okay. So
yeah, A24. I do like a lot of A24 films. I mean, but I think I think whenever I see an A24 horror film, I immediately ask myself, do you think it's a horror film? or did the trailers just make it look like a horror film? Because half the time it's like half the time that I've ever seen a trailer for an A24 film, I'm like, oh shit, this is this. And then I see the film and that's not what that is. And so I think like It Comes in the Night or something similar to that.
It comes at night with Joel Edgerton is the one you're talking about, right?
I remember the trailer for that, and everybody was like, "Oh shit! Like what's out there? What is it?" And then it was like it was like a complete different type of film. Anyway, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying I've learned to curb my expectations with A24, and I have nothing against them. I'll still go see them. I'm trying to think of what other A24 films I've seen lately. I have seen a few, but X was one of them. That's right.
X was quite an experience, quite a ride.
Was everything it advertised itself to be. X, like that was, I saw The Green Knight. The Green Knight was everything it advertised itself to be. I really enjoyed that. Maddie and I really like Lighthouse. I think that's an A24 film.
It is.
So there's a lot of them I truly like. There's a lot of them I like want to get around to seeing. Like I haven't seen The Tragedy of Macbeth yet. Minari is still high on my list. I loved Come On, Come On. That was like one of my top 10 films of last year, and I'm pretty sure that was A24. And
it was, yeah.
So it's a mixed bag for me, but I still get excited, because I feel like they curate a certain style, a certain type of film for each of their genres. And so when I saw that they were doing a film with Alex Garland, who, he's just legendary for the stuff that he's been attached to, I was like, all right, I'm intrigued, to say the least.
Yeah, I feel the same way about A24, to where like I enjoy going to see an A24 film simply because I know that I'm going to see something maybe not mind-blowing or groundbreaking, but something that is going to be a real treat as a cinephile. When you talk about story-wise, Lamb is a really unique and bizarre type of movie to talk about, as well as X. Like it is everything it advertises, but it's also so much more that's like woven into the tapestry of its tales. And now it's a duology, so you have Pearl to look forward to as well in the coming years. And then you get movies like Uncut Gems that are straight dramas, but also at the same time like they are just fueled by anxiety.
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever been in a theater where I've had that much anxiety walking out of a movie. And I think that they, just like you said, like they curate a lot of just up and coming voices, whether that's the Safdie brothers or Robert Eggers, or I think it's Eggston. What how the I'm blanking on his last name, but it's the guy that did the Lighthouse and the Northman this year.
Yeah. Eggers, isn't it? Isn't it Eggers? Right,
Okay.
Robert Eggers.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Eggers. Yeah.
And of course, Alex Garland kind of coming back to the house that essentially launched his career with Ex Machina.
Mm.
Which I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen Ex Machina as of this podcast yet. I get a lot of crap from it, but
What?
dude, yeah,
Oh my God. My God, man.
I
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you saw this film more because it's an A24 film, where I saw it because it's an Alex Garland film. Is that the case?
I saw it because I saw Annihilation in theaters, and
Oh,
I really loved Annihilation. I thought
yeah. Yeah.
Annihilation is criminally underrated. I don't
It is.
understand why it's kind of just fallen into like silence in our memory banks. When you talk about like great sci-fi movies that have been released in the 21st century, that is definitely up there. But
Mm-hmm.
this movie, for me in particularly, I really liked Jessie Buckley from Thinking About Ending Things. I thought she delivered a wonderful performance in that. And again, I didn't see anything in here, so like the posters that I would see at the theater were really creepy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know at all what I was walking into with this one. But again, really liked Annihilation, really liked Buckley, and people just kind of kept a lot of the horror sites that I follow, Bloody Disgusting, Dread Central, were reporting on this movie. So I was like, oh, it's a horror movie. So I'm there. So
Yeah.
like the
Sure.
horror aspect kind of sold me.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this thing lately. I don't know if it's just me like getting old and getting like cranky or something. Maybe that's the case, or or maybe I just don't trust anyone anymore. But basically, if I start watching a trailer and I feel like I might like the film, I'll just stop the trailer. Like I don't trust whether it's trailer 1 or trailer 3. Thank God I don't have TV anymore. So I pay for YouTube, so I don't see TV spots. Like I never see TV spots unless I actually search TV spot for a certain film. So if I like the trailer, or if I think I might like the movie, I'll stop watching the trailer before it's done, because I don't trust the trailer not to show me everything. And so that's what I did with this. I saw Alex Garland. I saw a couple, spots where, you had the guy, what's his name? You had Rory Kinnear playing a couple different. Looked like he was playing a couple different roles. And then as I saw, from Alex Garland, and I was like, okay, stop. I'm going to see it. I don't want to see anything more. I don't want to get it spoiled, because Alex Garland just he has this writing style. I mean, there was a movie that came out a long time ago, like 2000 something, maybe 2000 or 2000 itself, with Leonardo DiCaprio, called The Beach, that was
Mm.
based off a novel that Alex Garland wrote. Then he came to screen and did 28 Days Later. He wrote 28 Days Later. Danny Boyle directed that. He wrote Sunshine. He wrote the screenplay for Dread, and supposedly directed part of it, although that's not official. Then he did Ex Machina, and then Annihilation, and he's done other things. He's got the show called Devs that looked interesting, but I haven't seen it yet. But he always does like these, just like it's deeper than the surface level, and there's always something more to the story. And so I was afraid that the trailers were going to do that with this. And I was excited about it. I really wanted to see it. Oh yeah, there it is right there. 28 Days Later, baby. Right there.
On
Bam.
VHS.
VHS. classic, classic. That movie changed things. It changed an entire genre, and then and it came from this guy and Danny Boyle. Like, you look at all of Danny Boyle's other films, and you're like, wait, Danny Boyle did a zombie movie? What? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So just the idea that Alex Garland was doing this film that looked weird, and then A24 was interested in it, meant that it was definitely going to be weird. I was excited. So yeah, I finally got to see it over the weekend. I was trying to see it last weekend, and I couldn't. I had a Comic-Con to get to do, but yeah, man. You want to get into it? You want to tell me what you think?
I do, and I will say this. I will preface this by saying I've seen this movie twice.
Okay.
And the first time I saw it, I did a double feature with this and Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I hadn't seen any trailers for Men, and they showed a trailer for Men right before Everything.
Oh.
And I was very surprised at some of the shots that they put in to the Men trailer, because to me, some of the shots seem very spoilery. And so I'm glad you stopped watching it. But yeah, I authentically really loved this film. I'll get into it a little bit more because I know that this is a very polarizing film from people I've talked to online, social media accounts that I follow. This movie is very divisive, to say the least, but I fell into the camp that actually really passionately loves this movie, and I love it because, well, I have a similar emotional connection to Jessie-Buckley's character that I'll talk about as we get into spoilers. But this movie looks beautiful. I don't remember the last time I felt this much dread, but also was just amazed and perplexed by the cinematography and scenery of the movie. So I am curious to hear your thoughts on it, but what did you think?
I didn't hate it, but I can't see myself watching it again. I think if I were to rank it versus all the other Alex Garland films, it would be my least favorite. It's definitely an Alex Garland A24 film, or an A24 Alex Garland film. Like, I can't see this film being put out by any other studio than A24. The pacing, the direction, and the finale, it just wouldn't fit with anybody else but an A24 film. So I feel like it's at home where it's at. And unless you're walking into it with no knowledge of the type of stuff that A24 normally puts out, then you probably won't be shocked by the type of film it is. That being said, without getting into spoilers, I really appreciated the story. I think it's a very relevant story. It touches on things that you hear about a lot, especially with the younger generations, and how it's dealt with is really interesting. And yeah, like these are types of films that have been coming out more lately. Like, when the first 3/4 of this film, I was like, this is like it reminded me of things like Marriage Story and other like really really in your face looks at real relationships and the outcomes and the impacts that they have on individual psyches and everything. And I really did appreciate that. And I was really invested in the main character. She portrayed a person in that situation very well. And I was really interested with where this was going. And then the finale, while I understand like what it means, it just wasn't my thing, man. It's something it's not like a phobia I have, but I don't like it. I don't like seeing those type of scenes when it's regular, let alone when it's this. And then it just like did not stop until it stopped. And then, yeah, without going into spoilers, I was just left like, at the end, I'm like, I even texted you. I'm like, is there another scene or is that it? And I'm not always against those type of endings, but I just, yeah, it's an A24 film, and that's all I can say without getting into spoilers, really.
Yeah, the ending of this movie, the climax, seeing it a second time, like I had forgotten how long of a climax that is. And it
Mm-hmm.
feels even longer because there's no music to
Mm-hmm.
accompany the
Mm-hmm.
really disturbing nature that you're like taking on for like what I would say is probably like 10 minutes. And if it's
It
shorter than
feels
that,
like 20.
it
Yeah, it's
certainly
just,
feels like 20.
yeah.
It is definitely one of the weaker points in the movie. Um so yeah, let's go ahead and get into spoilers. This is your official spoiler warning for Alex Garland's Men. If you guys haven't seen it yet, hit pause, hit the download button, and go see it, and then come back. Um, but I since we're already there, let's talk about the body horror of this movie, because this is like David Cronenberg on PCP.
Oh, it definitely felt Cronenberg to me. Like in fact, I just watched a trailer, and I watched the whole trailer because Maddie wanted to see it, of Crimes of the Future that's coming out. That's a Cronenberg film, and Maddie was interested because Viggo Mortensen's in it, and I'm just like, knowing his past stuff, I'm like, and knowing that film is supposedly about an era where we don't feel pain, I'm like, I can only imagine the levels that film is going to go to. But I was not expecting this film to go to it, because, and I don't even want to talk about it yet, because I do really appreciate the first 3/4 of the film. I thought Jessie-Buckley, she's she was put in a shitty situation, and I've heard it from people I know, let alone from people on the internet and other stories. But you know, just a person wants out, and the other person pulls that card where they're like, if you divorce me or if you break up with me, I'll commit suicide. And they so Jesse's Harper's character James puts her in that position, and thankfully she doesn't accept it. She was like, that's a shitty thing for you to do, you can't put that on me. And then it gets out of hand. He gets physical at a later thing, and then he either does commit suicide, or the story is that he might have slipped and he falls ultimately to his death. And she goes off to this cabin or this really nice house in the British countryside to escape and to reset and to have some time by herself. And I really did like that setup. I liked that setup for the film. I thought that was great. It's she's kind of grieving, she's kind of resetting. She's just trying to find some inner peace by herself. And for the love of God, every man in this town is a certain degree of misogyny, and it's just constant like that. And I really did like that approach, that direction that the film went, especially when they all looked like Rory Kinnear. I thought that was creative. That's what I'm saying. I really did like the first 3/4 of this film, because it had so many really neat themes, and the way he was doing it really intrigued me.
Well, let's unpack a little bit about what you talked about there, specifically with the Harper James dynamic, because I was blessed enough to kind of go from, I've joked around about it in the past of I dated around a lot in high school, stopped for a year, and then eventually kind of got myself together and met my wife. Like I got lucky in that way. But I know that like I had a few high school relationships where it was toxic, to where you would have that varying degree where people would be like, oh, if you break up with me, then like I'm going to do it. And it's always very hard to be in those types of situations,
Mm-hmm.
because you're never quite you feel like you're walking this tightrope where it's like, well, this is really bad for my mental health, but if I if I stay with this person, but if I leave this person, there's always a chance that they could be bluffing or that they could be legitimate and I'm the only ray of sunshine in their life. Like, it's always a very hard task to walk. And I'm really glad that, he shows that brutality, and he's in this like very raw and real way, because there's a scene where they're fighting, and she basically rationalizes. She's like, don't you understand that, like, you saying this very statement of, if I divorce you, if I leave you, then you're going to take your life. Don't you understand that that's the exact reason that we need to get a divorce, is because, like, we're bad for one another. Like, we're toxic. And sometimes it sucks, but sometimes it takes living with someone, or it takes being, with someone for a really long, a few years before you kind of get to see, am I really right for this person, or, is this person really compatible with me for life, or stuff like that. And so I am glad that they kind of shown a light to that, because that is a really hard place to be in.
Yeah, and that scene in particular, even before the physical violence of it, that scene, their interactions, he was just so nonchalantly putting that on her. And I did like that she didn't take it. Like, she stood up for herself. She finally matched him in yelling, but he was just his tone and every interaction that you see was bad. You just were like, no, this isn't. It wasn't even like manipulation or, I'm sorry, I'll do better. It was just an angered tone, an accusing tone. And I liked that she, and that this carries through her character. She wasn't really grieving this whole movie. She was trying to reset. Like, I'm sure there was a part of her that was grieving, but it wasn't about her. Like, she wasn't like, crying to herself at night, I miss you, what did I do? She was very much like, I need a reset. I'm going out here, even if it's by myself. And, she was going on walks by herself, and it didn't feel like a woman in mourning. It felt like a person that's trying to, just move on and be a strong, independent person. And I really did like that. And then when these other characters seeped in, whether it was the, clear as day, weird nude man that was, stalking her through the woods, or it was these little interactions from these other guys, you were just getting levels of misogyny throughout the film. And I really did like that. Some of them were a little clearer and on the nose to others. Some of them were kind of like forced chivalry, to the point where, okay, it's not, you're kind of crossing the line. It's less chivalrous and more like a pride thing now. And I did like those levels. Every guy there, and it's not an attack on men. I've seen so many people just assume that that's what this film is about because it's entitled Men, and this is an all men are bad. It's not, but it was how she was perceiving things and how these particular characters were. And I did like that approach. They were all on different levels, but they all had little things that when you examined them, you were like, yeah, that's not cool.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, well, sometimes to that point, like when you go through a loss like Harper does in this movie, whether it is suicide or an accidental death, you're still facing survivor's guilt because you're you're essentially faced with Schrodinger's cat. Like, is the cat alive? Is the cat dead? So you have this like, did he, didn't he kind of scenario. And so I know from previous experiences in the past that like, I had a lot of, I've had seasons of my life where like a lot of friends that I've encountered are women, and I've had a lot where I just have straight up guy friends, and that's fine. But oftentimes when there is a tragedy like this, I know that like for me, I don't know how you are, but like there are times where like I need to revert to my guy friends, or I need to revert exclusively to my wife. And it kind of feels like, while she might not necessarily feel like this, because you look and you see how her saving grace is in this movie. Riley is kind of the linchpin that kind of holds her mental health together throughout all of this experience. And it's the females that she confides in. And on my second viewing, I noticed that like how they handled the men throughout the narrative of being, like you're saying, like different degrees of like pride and misogyny, and that toxic masculinity that you see kind of peppered throughout the course of this film. And even up until the really kind of bizarre ending, anytime that she is kind of, quote, safe is when she's talking to Riley, or when she's also kind of giving her report to the female officer. Because there's two officers in this movie that we see, and one is portrayed as a element of toxic masculinity, whereas the other is just kind of been like a safe kind of calming reserve for her throughout this traumatic experience.
Yeah, well, and I did like how, so the concept is that all the men and the boys, even the priest, they all look like Jeffrey. They all look like Rory Kinnear in this film. And Jeffrey is the guy that owns the house, and he's kind of like an older, middle-aged guy. And he's that type of, he's harmless, but he's also, the type of that keeps on showing up, and keeps on being there. And it never gets to the point where he like tries to like do something inappropriate with her. But it kind of reminded me of, there's like a stupid SNL skit of why'd you like that? And it's like a game show where they ask these guys, why did you like this post on Instagram of so-and-so? And they would be like, oh, because I like her music. Nope. Oh, because, I thought that dress looked nice. Nope. And the true answer to every question was, because I thought if she thought I was nice, maybe she'd sleep with me, and it was just like a thing. And it's a joke, but it's not. Like, it is like, there's a lot of fake chivalry nowadays, because like it is like a path, the road to getting laid. And while it didn't get to that point, I felt those themes with even with Jeffrey, because he kept on showing up. He kept on, insisting to pay for drinks and stuff like that. And while sometimes it was a relief when he showed up so that she could make sure she wasn't just seeing things, he was also always showing up. And that's like, to anyone that could be annoying and crossing a line and, just being too present and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's always too like, and it's always really hard, I feel like, to kind of get away when you're kind of going through what Harper's going through.
Mm-hmm.
She's in essence going through a degree of survivor's guilt, and survivor's guilt's kind of already hard enough to kind of experience, but once you experience a lot of being away into like a Airbnb with areas that you don't really know, that's kind of adding on to a little bit of like the uncertainty of the unknown. And also you're starting to get into the really, what am I signing up for? Because the early in the movie, when Jeffrey gives her a tour, she gets on the call with Riley. She's like, he's kind of exhausting to be around, is the kind of how she describes it. And then like you said, like he keeps like popping up. And honestly, like if you're going to kind of decompress and kind of reset yourself to a degree, you need to kind of get away to somewhere that's going to be secluded, but also at the same time, it's going to be somewhat familiar. Mm-hmm. Because you're already in a damaged spot as with the death of James, but kind of adding in a lot of those uncertainty variables that we kind of see her go throughout the movie really can, I feel like, make that healing process that much detrimental.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like that the theme of boundaries and invading personal space and it was something that kept on coming up. So where Jeffrey would keep on showing up, and even if she wasn't somebody that was grieving, even if she was just there to have a vacation, that would be like, stop showing up, like fucking give me some space, boundaries, man. But then other characters kept on crossing boundaries, invading space. The priest was, at one point was, kind of seemed like, hey, it seems like you're grieving. But then instead of being like, can we talk? He was like, come sit with me. It was like a command. And then when they were sitting, he wasn't letting her finish sentences. And even when he was wrong and she would try to correct him, then he would say something else until she said, yeah, that's it. And he would put his hand on her. And just those little things were like, you're crossing boundaries. And then there were more in your face boundaries of the dude with his dick out, just, walking around and looking in the house and following her. And, then other small things of the boys in town just staring her down or calling her a bitch for not wanting to play their games. And it was just a one boundary, one invasion after another. And I'm sure that was amplified by the fact that she was, going through something and needed her space. And she couldn't even get it. Like even the cop, when he came in the bar and she was trying to just fucking have her drink, he was like, are you okay after everything? Like she probably didn't need everybody in the bar to know about, what happened that afternoon. But, the cop was just fine with like, oh, hey, this is what happened to her and everything. And so it was just one thing after another of an invasion of her space and her boundaries, then all just leading up to this disturbing finale. But right before that body horror stuff, just then that physical invasion of her house, I thought was really interesting because it, every time she turned a corner and the character would come after her, it would be a different version of the character. And it just like the manifestation of all of these small incidents just coming at her and just, invading her ultimate privacy in the home to the point where she was, physically defending herself. And I did appreciate that. I did like seeing that the visual of these different characters, just going, invading every space that she had.
Was not just the fact that they invaded her home space, that the sanctity of where you feel safe at. Not only do they affect that, but there's with that scene, you're not only if you're invading her sanctity, but you're also at the same time invading her kind of personal boundaries, as you said, like the bar scene. And then that bar scene kind of sets the template for what you're going to experience the rest of the movie. So you have that bar sequence where you have that invasion of privacy, then you have the home invasion element, but then you also have the safety of one's self, where you have the cop that essentially just kind of stares, then disappears. And then you have multiple versions of that character just kind of charging at her and essentially just trying to uproot her safety as an individual. And then I think it kind of crescendos with the priest kind of doing, the invasion of purity, where you have, kind of talking about how old were you the first time that you had sex? And then you kind of dive more into that. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to just kind of place my hands on you again and kind of really start to potentially borderline rape you. And that's kind of the point in the movie where it realizes that, like, I'm almost curious, like, now in a post Me Too world, how many more movies we get like this that are speaking volumes on people, abusers, like, the Catholic Church and the Spotlight all those years ago, and the Vatican covering it up, but also, you have heavy hitters like Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein. We're even seeing the effects of that now with Johnny Depp being in court because of Amber Heard's allegations. And so many of these things it kind of, if I'm going to be vulnerable, man, it kind of almost that's kind of the part that is scary to me, where it's like you can be attacked literally any way that you go, whether you're male or female.
Yeah, and yeah, it's good. It's a good analysis there. I also liked, up until the body horror scene, I was noticing that as they kept on attacking and she defended herself, she was recreating the injuries of her dead husband. The one time you saw him after the fall, he had caught like a metal fence or whatever, and it pretty much split his one arm, and his leg was broken and some other stuff. And it was a gruesome thing. But then as these guys are attacking and she's defending herself, she's recreating those. And it seemed just like ridiculously gory at first. And I was like, oh, wait, actually, that is the same thing with the arm. And then there's a point where Jeffrey is walking, or not Jeffrey, but the nude nature guy is walking and his leg just breaks, or his ankle just breaks. And I was like, oh God. But then I was like, oh wait, that is how. So I caught that, and I was like, this is interesting. It's like, is she, is this her, doing the damage on them? And whereas, she doesn't believe she's responsible for the damage to her husband, or is it once again their fault because they're the attacker in this? And what she's doing is not her fault, but it's reactionary. It's in self-defense. It's in self-preservation. I did like that discussion that was going on in my head. And then even Jeffrey, there's a point where she thinks she hits him and she's freaking out, like it's the one guy that she actually is like, oh shit, I didn't mean to do that. And she feels bad. And then he just like yanks her from the car and tries to kill her himself with the car. thus, making him the last guy to, kind of turn, but officially turn. But I just liked that. And then it crescendoed into this body horror thing that I'm still thinking about. But before we talk about that, I did want to ask you what the guy with the nature thing, like there was the thing in the church, had a stone thing with the leaves, and then the guy was like mimicking that. Is that supposed to be like the nature of men? Is that the allegory for that? Or what's your thoughts on that?
No, so I have the answer for the tree guy
Yeah.
that we see.
This guy, he's naked, he's out in the forest, and the more you see him, the more leaves and shit are like growing out of him.
But I do not have an answer for the backside of that church scene where you get the stone and it's like supposed to be like the woman. I don't have an answer for that. However, the front side of that with kind of like the sun looking thing, and then ultimately what we see the nudist guy, it actually comes from a pagan tradition or legend called the Green Man, and he is actually used as a symbol of seasonal renewal and ecological awareness. In Wicca, the Green Man has often been used as a representation of the Horn God, a deity that incorporates aspects, among others, the Celtic Chirnos and the Greek Pan. So to me, like I kind of, after I learned that, I kind of took it as, oh, this is Harper's journey to kind of come to grips with this loss in her life. I think that iconography is what I'm trying to say of seasonal renewal is, sometimes when you lose someone to suicide and potentially in this case, or you lose someone to death. I mean, that grieving process looks differently for everyone. We've talked about it in the past across all of our podcasts, but specifically with her in this film, I feel like kind of going through all of this stuff, because that body horror scene starts with the nude man essentially becoming the Green Man and essentially kind of giving birth to all of these different versions of the Rory Keener character, or eventually ultimately arriving at James. And so one of the last kind of sequences we see in this movie is of Harper just kind of playing with a leaf. And to me, that kind of took it as a symbol of her kind of coming to peace with a lot of the tragedy and a lot of the strangeness that had befallen her over the last, I'll say, couple weeks at the span of this movie.
Yeah, well, so that birthing scene, it just wasn't my cup of tea. It's not, I don't like regular birthing scenes in movies, let alone this body horror version of it. It just kept on getting worse. Like at first it started out like, what you would see, and then it kept on coming from different parts of the body, and either holes developing or out of the mouth or other orifices, and it was just grotesque. I just didn't care for it. Like I just didn't need to keep seeing it. What I thought was interesting about the scene was her, I don't know if she was realizing it or just her less and less horror of it. Like the longer it went on, I got exhausted of seeing it. And I'm just like, oh, fucking finish already. And the look on her face was almost the same. Like she was done with it. She was kind of horrified at first. And the more she went into the house and the more it followed her, the less like shits she had to give, the less fucks she had to give, to the point where it almost felt like she knew that James was going to be the last one. and she was just waiting in the room for him to show. Like she didn't seem shocked. She was, James, what, you're back, or anything like that. She was just kind of waiting, like you've put me through all this. And I really did like their last interaction. He sits down with his same injuries from his accident. She sits next to him and she's just like, what the fuck do you want from me? I'm trying to move on. And he in true to his character, is completely selfish, has no care for what she's going through, no care for her life, and just says, I want you to love me. And that is the most, in this context, the most selfish thing. In any other movie, it could be seen as romantic. It could be seen as adorable. It could be seen as, vulnerable. In this, it's selfishness in its most grotesque form. And then it cuts to black, and while I hated the birthing over and over and over, I appreciated that final moment. And then the scene of Riley showing up and her finding her friend sitting there covered in blood looking at the leaf, I thought was interesting. So I thought that was all interesting. I thought it was a very interesting end. But the fact that there was a trail of blood into the house and that she was covered in blood, do you think in reality she just killed Jeffrey? Or what do you think that was hinting at the reality of it was? Because Riley clearly saw a ton of blood, but she didn't see carcasses leading into the house. So what do you think actually happened?
Yeah, that ending scene is, I kind of hate the ending because I feel like it takes away from the potence of that final confrontation between Harper and James.
It made you think of something else instead of that interaction. It made you then question, well, wait, what? Yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, he goes and it just says something incredibly selfish and says, I want you to love me. And it kind of goes back to that first interaction between her and the priest, where the priest is basically like, oh, it's, had you done this, like he would still be alive. Mm-hmm. And kind of tries to flip James's demise back onto Harper. And he does the same thing in that last interaction, to where it's like, oh, you can't get peace for my death. Like, I wanted to haunt you forever. And he even says that early in the film. He's like, I'm going to end my life and you are going to have to live with that the rest of your days. And from someone that has said those exact words, like, I would never wish my worst enemy to ever experience a suicide, because it is one of the hardest things to have to go through. And so the fact that, it's constantly still on her conscious because of that last interaction, to me, I felt like that last moment between Riley pulling up and Harper, it just kind of took away from the potence, because we see earlier on, before the body horror starts, that clearly a lot of what she's experiencing with this toxic masculinity is in her head, or it's supposed to be a commentary on gaslighting women. I mean, either way you look at it, what she's saying in the reality of this movie is not actually happening between, what her and Jeffrey are seeing. She's saying one thing, she's saying one thing, but like reality is kind of telling this different story with the bird. And honestly, dude, like, I hadn't even thought about that. The fact that there's no carcass of body. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if in her grief, she ends up actually killing Jeffrey as a way to kind of cope with it, because there's no other way to explain it. There's no other way to really rationalize it. Here you have potentially a character that could have gone crazy from the isolation, the recent death of her husband, the pending divorce, and eventually your body can only take so much. And if you're not taking care of your mental health, it snaps and you do really terrible things sometimes.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, but then that's just then it did take away from what I felt I felt all the way up into that last interaction between her and James. I felt like she was this strong character that just wasn't going to let you be, shitty. Like, she was going to call you out. And now, especially when her ex put this on her, and then such a tragedy happened, she had no more fucks to give. And she wasn't gonna, it didn't matter if you were a priest, didn't matter if you were a cop, she was not going to let you be shitty to her. And I really liked that. I just thought that just really talked to her character. So then this final scene was like, oh, but wait, that strength ended up snapping and she killed somebody. And it was like, it kind of felt like a departure for the character. Like, oh, I guess she's not strong, she's just insane. Like that. It felt like it didn't feel like I'm getting over this no matter how many obstacles are in my way. It kind of seemed to show that no, she ended up breaking under the pressure and killing at least one person. And I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting send off, where 5 seconds earlier could have been the ending, and that would have been a solid enough ending, So it was an interesting choice to end it on that note.
Yeah, especially the fact that, like, you have, as we've already established, like the female characters for Harper are kind of like the safety zone for her. It's where she feels most comfortable. And it does feel very forced in a way. Whereas I feel like you have that open-endedness between her and James before the title sequence. And had you just decided to leave it there and, show the flower sequence of the actual credits, like I feel like the movie would have been so much stronger. It's one of my very few complaints about the movie, but it takes away from the potence of that character journey, to where, like you said, like now the audience is kind of left with this idea of, instead of making up their own decisions about what happened to these characters, they're kind of force fed, oh, well, she might have killed these persons, and oh yeah, the last 40 minutes you've spent, this character is not been kind of going through this healing process, she's just really crazy.
Yeah, so that's why I put this at the bottom of my list for Alex Garland films. When I see that Alex Garland is writing a horror film, or Alex Garland is writing a Judge Dredd film, or Alex Garland is is doing Annihilation or Ex Machina, what I expect is he's going to bring depth to a genre that has been around for a while, that has been copy pasted for a while. And I don't know if you can hear her, but my little Frenchie over here is just snoring like crazy. But he brings depth, like even Sunshine was a pretty straightforward film, but he injected depth to it. Whereas this film, it felt like a formula A24 film, to where, right down to I swear they must have a checklist for their films. Like, we're going to need you to incorporate some type of a repetitive music cue that's based on something that they hum or something that they say. And then that's going to repeat throughout the film. Her little tunnel thing that repeats constantly throughout the film. That happens in tons of A24 films. And just like other A24 films, not all of them, I feel like things like Come On, Come On had so much depth, and that film made me cry, and I love that film to death. But a lot of these, where there's the surface level mystery, it has themes that have depth to it, but the actual story doesn't get much deeper than that. Like, sure. I felt like this in any other studio would have gone a little deeper or explored the situation or explained a little more, but A24 is fine with just keeping it on that surface level and then leaving you with question marks, because that's their formula. And that doesn't, it sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I felt like, while I understood the themes of it, I just didn't enjoy the movie as much as I've enjoyed other ones of his films. So yeah.
Sure. I want to go ahead and speak this real quick. I will provide this link in the descriptions below, but there are the flashback sequences in particular are one of the reasons why it's really important to know the warning signs for suicide. So the warning signs for suicide are an individual talking about wanting to die or to kill oneself, looking for a way to kill oneself, talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose, talking about feeling trapped or being in unbearable pain, talking about being a burden to others, increasing the number of alcohol or drugs, feeling anxious, agitated, or reckless, sleeping too much or too little, withdrawing or feeling isolated, showing rage or talking about revenge, or displaying extreme mood swings. And the reason that I bring that up in particular is because when you look at how the flashback sequences are shot, where they are mostly red, that to me at least, I kind of took it as like, this is maybe not factual, but like what she's experiencing in these troubled times are typically, when you see red in stuff, it's meaning like trouble and stuff like that. So like, to me, like, I took a lot of that, the red, to kind of signify that we are, as the audience, experiencing some sense of turbulence and between this relationship. And while the film looks really good and with this cinematography, you're experiencing, like you said earlier, this marriage story styled a relationship kind of crumbling. And you're kind of getting to see like how Harper's processing it, but also how James is processing it, and how their two different ideals are essentially accelerating the tension of those sequences. I can't hear you, Frenchie, by the way.
You can't? I can. She's like,
I cannot.
She's like super loud. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's, obviously, if anyone's listening to this and they haven't seen the film and they're like, well, what the fuck, Josh? It doesn't sound like a film you're supposed to like. And I guess that's a valid commentary, that it definitely isn't a fun film. But I can appreciate other dramas. Like, it doesn't need to be a comedy for me to think it's a fun movie, or or a good, I love dramas, and I think, and I love Alex Garland, and I love some of the things that he brings into films. I just feel like this film was one film, and then it suddenly was crowbarred into another film, and I really liked the setup, and I just didn't care for the payoff. But and it's not a film I'd watch again, not because I hated it or not because it wasn't well done, just because like I get it. It's not something that I would find enjoyable to watch again. And oddly enough, like it's definitely not enjoyable, which is weird because I've enjoyed everything that Alex Garland has put out. This is definitely like, I don't know if someone approached him and they're like, hey, we'd like you to come up with a topic. Come up with a story around this topic and film it like an A24 film. But it definitely feels like, he was like, I want to take a break from this normal stuff that I do and do an A24 film that is, it's not exaggerated, but it's an A24 formula about a certain topic. And that's usually what happens. Like there's two categories of A24 films. There's like the dramas that are just really good, and they're normal films under the A24 banner. And then there's these other films that take a topic that you're like, oh, that's a really interesting take on that topic. And then they just inject weird shit into that topic. And then it's like, oh yeah, it's an A24 film. And this definitely fits under that category. So I think I'm glad I went to see it alone. I was going to drag one or two other people to this, and they would have probably been like, oh, fuck you, we're not going to another movie you suggested. So I'm glad I went to it alone, but I was like, I'm ready to get out. I texted you once I knew there wasn't another scene. I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm good.
I want to agree with you. I think that this movie is definitely not for the faint of heart. This is not a fun time. This is a heavy movie.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think it's heavy mostly because of, well, it's a movie that it does what a lot of social commentaries do. It holds a mirror up to the audience and kind of tells you to, hey, like, these are the things that we find currently wrong in society, and we're challenging you to grow as the human race. And I feel like one of the things that I've heard a lot of people say that have kind of had the same attitude that you've had is, this is a movie that's A, it's not going to be for everyone, but B, at the same time, Garland is saying a lot of different things here. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of rich symbolism that he's trying to bring to this story. And I think that a lot of this symbolism is kind of like a movie like Get Out, where I feel like that's kind of the standard of what we compare things to, or like to pull from the A24, Hereditary is another great example, where like here you have a movie that is essentially begins as a standard drama and then eventually evolves into this terrorizing scenario that just happens to, again, be a social commentary. But there's so many nuances and little things that the Peele and Arster are doing throughout the course of the film that are making you to say, hey, like, you're going to come back because this is a movie that needs to be studied. And Us is exactly the same exact way. Like, Peele brings so many different things, and like everything in that film has a purpose. And, even having this conversation over the last hour, like, I have a new appreciation for different aspects of this movie, simply because there are things that like I missed out on or I overthought, but like being able to like have a conversation with this movie with someone else has kind of made me see a little bit more of like, oh, hey, like this is something else that he was trying to do, because there is a lot of symbolism and richness that I think he weaves in here. I think it's not done always the most graceful. But again, I think because of how disturbing this movie ends up being at the end, that's kind of where a lot of people are going to walk away from this movie hating it.
Well, yeah, I think everything from the film itself to the title of the film is meant to be triggering, and it is triggering. And I have seen plenty of people who have just seen the poster or just seen the trailer or just seen the name of the film and assume that it's anti-men post piece, and that they I plenty of people have just bashed on this film without even seeing it, just assuming that it's anti-men, it's another anti-men thing. Well, first of all, there's not a lot of anti-men things out there. How many anti-men movies are there really? And second of all, it's not that. There's not one point and where the main character gets up on a soapbox and does a whole rant against men. It's not there. And even from I've seen things of, well, why isn't there one good guy in the film? There's just not in this film. Like, it doesn't mean it's not a commentary on men in the entire race. It's just a commentary on what did you pick up, and it does help you. Like, there's nothing that hidden in here. The misogyny is fairly blatant. So if you don't pick up on it, then yeah, you probably do have issues. But I imagine the majority of people would be like, don't put your hand on her knee like that, or calm down. Don't barge your way in there like that, or don't call her a bitch just because she doesn't want to play your game. I think most of it is feeding you this. It doesn't take a genius to figure out the themes and the where it's going with it. So it's not an anti-man and pro-woman, uber feminist or whatever. I've seen so many things on that. It's just not. It does it drop the ball at some points? I think so, but I think the themes are there, and just don't watch it if you don't want to watch it, man. But like, come on, I don't think that was the point of the film, is all men are bad and women are good and fuck men, that's just like, it just sounds like the unintelligent assumption of the film from someone that didn't actually see it.
Yeah, this is a movie that makes you think, and this is a movie that, again, has something to say, and it's worth being thought about. Like, the fact that you've seen it for a couple of days and like can't get the end out of your head, like, means something. And I think this is going to be a movie that, coming into the end of the year, this is going to be one of the most divisive films of the year. And I think that this will ultimately go down as being one of the most divisive films in the entire decade, because there doesn't seem to be a gray area. It seems to be like, this is like a Zack Snyder level polarizing, where you either really love this movie or you really hate it. Like, there's not a whole lot of gray area. So if you guys have seen Men, what did you guys think about it? Let us know. But where can people find you online, my friend?
I'm out there. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Just look up Fierce Lit or Fierce Literature, fiercelit.com or fierceliterature.com. I got a few more shows coming up. I'll be at Smallville Con on June 18th, I think, June 18th or June 19th. That should be fun. There's a town down in Kansas called Hutchinson. I don't know if you know this. It's called Hutchinson, Kansas. And every year in June, the mayor legally changes the town's name to Smallville for a month.
That's
and
awesome.
You can mail things to Smallville. You can mail things from Smallville. The town, even the Postal Service recognizes it. It is officially Smallville for it's either a couple weeks or the full month of June. And then every other point of the year, it's Hutchinson, Kansas. So it's kind of cool. And they have a Comic-Con, so I'm going to be down there for that. And then I will be locking myself away to finish projects over the summer so I could debut them at New York Comic-Con in October. But I'm out there online. Find me if you wish.
He'll also be back next month talking about Thor: Love and Thunder.
Oh yeah, find me at the Marvel. I mean, I'll come back and talk about anything, man. There's right now I'm knee deep in Obi-Wan, and I just binged all of Stranger Things over the weekend. And man, I'm telling you, this weekend was a ton between Men, Top Gun, Stranger Things, like 7 episodes of Stranger Things and 2 episodes of Kenobi. I got my share, my ample helping of screen this weekend. There was a lot of stuff that my eyes witnessed, to say the least.
All right. Well, you guys can follow me. I am, speaking of screens, you guys can follow me on Letterboxd. I'm at Captain Nostalgia. Follow me on TikTok, where I occasionally make stuff. It's at Gent Ghostface, or you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Go to victimsandvillains.net to find more podcasts like this, links to all of those social medias, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library, all of which you guys can find in the show notes below. Have a good night, and we'll see you guys soon.